Episode 20, Emperor of the Koopas. Grand General Sheldon walked down a hall in the Koopa Central Imperial Citadel, the sounds of his footsteps echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the spacious corridor. Large golden statues of the Emperor stood in alcoves built into the walls, staring down at him and making him feel small and insignificant. The light from the jewel-encrusted chandeliers above made them cast huge shadows down upon the red carpet, which would periodically cover Sheldon every time he walked past one of their perpetually snarling visages. The further Sheldon went down the hallway, the more his dread grew. This sense of fear was an alien one for the chairman of Koopa High Command and supreme commander of the Koopa Troop. He hadn't felt like this since the old days, when he had gripped his hammer in his sweaty hands and listened to the distant sounds of Mario jumping and smashing his way through the castle, knowing that any minute his one shot at taking down the plumber would be here. It was a feeling that was becoming more and more prevalent within the Imperial Citadel, even though it was the most well-defended building in the world. Kamek had been able to keep things under control in the first years following the Koopa Empire's world conquest, but after the old Magic Koopa had come down with the Delfino fever and finally dead, things had begun to deteriorate. Cammy, who the Emperor had never liked quite as much, had perhaps been able to hold things together. Until she had left suddenly, giving no reason for her departure, 2 years ago. Sheldon sighed. Poor Emperor Bowser. Sheldon reached an intersection in the hallway, where he was surprised to run into a familiar face. It was a green-robed shy guy wearing a brown backpack stuffed with various items such as a magic wand, a small grey pipe, and a tiny Koopa Empire flag.
"Ah, good evening to you, Grand General,"
the shy guy said with a sharp salute.
"Looking forward to resting after that meeting."
Sheldon nodded.
"Oh, quite definitely, General Guy,"
he said. This shy guy, not to be confused with the white-robed shy guy of the same rank, who had died fighting against the Metro Kingdom, was, in his opinion, one of the Koopa Troop's finest leaders. He and his 2 friends had worked their way up from being low-ranked grunts just lucky enough to encounter the exiled Bowser after the kingdom had been taken over by the madman Fawful, to generals of the troop and valued members of high command.
"Unfortunately, there's one important duty I have to attend to first."
Guy nodded sympathetically.
"Ah. I pity you, Grand General." "A pity?"
He shook his head.
"It makes me so sad, you know. Paraplunk, Goomp, and I were just talking about it last night. He used to be so alive, our Emperor. Nothing could ever take him down. Not being crushed by a castle, not being run over by a train. Nothing."
Sheldon nodded, thinking back to his more exciting youth.
"I could be court-martialed for saying this, but,"
he looked around the corridor to see if there was anybody with him aside from Guy,
"I almost wish Mario was back. Would do Emperor Bowser some good." Yes, I know,"
Guy agreed.
"Any news on the princess?"
Sheldon asked. Guy was the director of one of the Koopa Empire's highest-funded divisions, the Toadstool Unit. Its sole purpose was tracking down the missing Princess Peach. The princess hadn't been seen since the Battle of Toad Town, over 20 years ago. Sheldon privately thought she was dead, although voicing that thought would have been an act of high treason. Likely most people in the world thought the same. Nevertheless, Emperor Bowser was not most people, which led by coins being poured into the Toadstool Unit instead of improving the Empire's infrastructure.
"Same way it's been since the beginning."
Guy shrugged.
"We've been everywhere. Every kingdom, every little hideaway. I still have our space units combing the galaxies, but they've found nothing so far." "What about Star Haven?"
Sheldon pressed, even though he was sure he already knew the answer.
"It's a bust so far."
Guy sighed dejectedly.
"We had all of our strongest Magic Koopas working together to cast a spell that allowed us to view it, since there's no way they'd let us inside. Just a whole bunch of star kids. That's all. We're still looking into strengthening the spell since the star spirits may be hiding her, but let's face it, the only place we're going to find Peach is the over there. Don't give Emperor Bowser that idea.
Sheldon chuckled dryly. Guy shuddered.
Indeed.
He agreed.
Good luck, Grand General. Thanks for your consideration.
Sheldon replied with a polite smile, before walking off down the hallway again. The short conversation had done little to help with Sheldon's mood. His heart beat like an angry thwomp as he continued down the endless corridor. Sheldon was a proud member of the Koopa Troop. He wore on his back the purple cape of the Grand General, a tradition that had been kept since the days of the war against the Shadow Queen. He still wore the old Hammer Bro uniform, with the blue helmet and the wooden mallet. From time to time, he still thought back with pride to the days when he was just a captain, when he had kept his division together when the entire troop had been spirited away to that dark castle by the interdimensional sorcerer calling himself Count Bleck. He had been able to help the princess there, being one of the few Koopa Troop members to interact with her as anything but an enemy. He hated to think what would have happened to her, or the universe, if he and one of his privates hadn't stumbled across her in one of the gloomy halls of Castle Bleck. He had gone down like a hero in particular event, subdued by one of Count Bleck's subordinates while trying to break his loyal soldier Johnson out of a hypnotic trance. After that whole fiasco was over, he had continued to strive to improve himself to atone for the shame of being hypnotized and forced to fight against Bowser. Eventually, even Bowser noticed his efforts, which led to his climb through the ranks until he was at last at the very top. Yes, those were the days. The days of the old Koopa Troop. Sheldon reached the end of the hallway. He took a deep breath. There, looming before him, was a gigantic door, made of green iron. A huge stone image of Emperor Bowser's head loomed over the door, which was more than 12 feet in height. No point in putting this off anymore. Sheldon touched the door's cold metal surface. As if by magic, the massive doors began to open. The throne room of the Koopa Empire was one of the largest rooms Sheldon had ever laid eyes upon. It was circular in shape and larger than the castle's grand ballroom. Despite this, it had very little ground. Most of the room was filled up with a very deep pit filled with lava, over which a bridge was suspended leading to the throne. Dim red light filtered through the stained glass windows that lined the walls, each one depicting a different stage in Emperor Bowser's life. The impossibly tall domed ceiling was decorated with an extremely ornate map of the Mushroom World, designed so that Koopa Central was placed directly above the throne, which was in the exact center of the room, at the end of the bridge. The entire hall was silent save for the bubbling of the lava as Sheldon walked down the long, stone bridge covered with ornate red carpet. The throne loomed before him, positioned at the top of a small flight of steps so that it would always be above whoever approached it. Light from the lava reflected off its golden spikes, making the throne shine like a piece of a star fallen down from the heavens. Emperor Bowser slouched on the throne's plush red cushion, his eyes closed. Emperor Bowser looked to Sheldon like a Koopa twice his age. He was not old yet, but despite that Sheldon could see that Bowser's once brilliant red hair was already starting to gray. Bowser wore around his shoulders a red cape with spiked, golden shoulder pads, a symbol of the superior power he wore as the Koopa Emperor. He was motionless, and Sheldon was not quite sure he even knew he was no longer alone. Sheldon knelt before his emperor, in the center of the huge likeness of his face on the rug before the throne.
Emperor Bowser, Your Highness,
he said respectfully.
Grand General Sheldon here to report the status of the conflict in Sector 2.
Bowser gave a barely audible grunt. This was confirmation enough that Bowser had heard him. Sheldon did not want to spend any more time than necessary in the throne room. Both the lava and the stress of the situation were making him sweat uncontrollably.
There is active fighting between the forces of your son Roy Koopa and his brothers Morton Koopa Jr. and Bowser Jr.,
Sheldon reported.
The fighting rages throughout all of Sector 2. Furthermore, neither General Koops nor King Boo were at the last High Command meeting, which has led us to believe Larry and Ludwig are also involved due to them being their chief subordinates.
The loss of Koops was something that had affected Sheldon greatly. Koops was a smart person, with fighting skills that rivaled even those of the Koopalings or Kami. What was more, he also cared about his subordinates, something Sheldon highly valued. There were too many officers in the Koopa troop who enjoyed tormenting others these days.
Emperor Bowser,
Sheldon continued,
we of Koopa High Command have asked for your permission to send out fleets from Koopa Central in an attempt to defuse the combat and beat down the revolution. We fear that an alliance of 3 of the most powerful sectors against your leadership could prove disastrous for imperial stability.
Huh? Bowser grunted, opening his eyes.
You know what, Sheldon?
He asked, straightening himself and propping his head up with one arm.
I couldn't care less. Let 'em fight.
Sheldon sighed. He had been expecting an answer like this.
Emperor Bowser, I beg you, please reconsider.
He asked, looking up to meet his monarch's gaze.
Thousands of Koopas gave their lives to make this empire a reality. To give up on it would make all of their sacrifices forfeit. You've achieved your life's goal, Your Highness. You beat Mario. You rule not only the Mushroom Kingdom, but every other kingdom under the sun. Even the stars are afraid to challenge you face to face. Don't let your dream go to waste.
Sheldon's words seemed to spark something inside of Bowser, although it was far from the spark Sheldon was hoping for. Bowser practically flung himself off his throne and roared, his loud voice echoing throughout the cavernous hall. Sparks flew from his mouth, stinging Sheldon's face.
Don't you dare tell me what my life's goal is!
Bowser exclaimed, stomping down the short staircase with the force of an earthquake. Sheldon instantly rose to his feet and took a few steps back. This could get ugly.
I have nothing.
He rose his arms, gesturing at the massive room and its opulent, over-the-top luxury.
What is the use of all this if I have to rule it alone?
He spun around, facing his enormous throne.
There should be 2 thrones here.
Bowser roared.
Right next to this one, there should be a smaller one, a pink one that she'd sit on.
Bowser stomped towards Sheldon and, without warning, picked the Grand General up. Sheldon kicked his legs wildly, although he knew there was no escape. He was going to be in pain this night. Sheldon stared into his Emperor's wild, red eyes. It was a sight that could strike fear into even the most hardened soldier.
This empire can die.
Bowser growled darkly.
Every castle, every warship, every flag. They can all burn. I don't even care if I die. Without her, why am I even alive?
Bowser flung Sheldon down to the ground. The hammer bro cried out in pain as he bounced on the hard marble surface, feeling some blood trickle down his face. Forcing himself upward, he watched as Bowser, thankfully, began stomping back to his throne with a swish of his cape.
Find Princess Peach!
Bowser ordered.
That's all I want. Bankrupt the military, bankrupt the sciences, bankrupt the hospitals, even bankrupt the stupid banks for all I care. Whatever it takes to track her down, do it. I want Princess Peach to stand next to me, Sheldon. I'm not going to die knowing I killed the only man in the world who could give me a decent fight for nothing.
He sighed dejectedly, sitting back down on the throne.
Where's Cammy when I need her?
Bowser grumbled to no one in particular, shaking his head.
I will relay the news to High Command, Your Majesty.
Sheldon replied with a quick salute, before turning and beginning to walk back the long bridge back to the massive door. Few people aside from the members of High Command, the Kupalings, and Kami knew about the Emperor's mental state. If it were more widespread, he didn't doubt that it would weaken morale. It was a tough time to be the Grand General, and he had a feeling things were about to get a lot worse than this. If this war went unchecked, he might have to bring out that old hammer of his one last time. While passing through the massive doors again back into the hallway, Sheldon found himself making a wish to Star Road.
"Please help Emperor Bowser find meaning in life again,"
he prayed.
"Grant him a challenge, an obstacle. Anything. Anything to see the Koopa troop return to the way it once was."